Hi everyone, I'm Mary from Joyful and Mary Quilting, and today I'm going to share the top 10 quilting tips I wish I would have known when I first started quilting. Be sure to watch all the way until the end because I have a bonus tip that has truly been a game changer for me. I've come across this valuable information little by little over the past 30 years that I have been quilting. I just really want to share those tips with you. I believe they're going to help you not only improve your quilting skills, but they're going to help you save time, and in the end, you are going to achieve a much more polished result. For several of these tips, I'm going to be referring to videos that I have already created. So you can either click on the link in the description and that will take you to the full video if you'd like to learn more. I know you have more tips to share, so please do that in the comment section after you've watched my 10 tips and see if we can't create a list for our new quilters so that they will feel more comfortable as they begin this fantastic quilting journey. So let's get started. Tip number 1, fabric folding for storage and organization. One of the first things I wish I would have known is how to fold and store fabric efficiently so that I can find it down the road when I decide it's time to use it. A great method that I use is just taking my 6" by 24" or 6.5" by 24.5" or 8" by 24", whatever you want, and I fold my fabric around the ruler. So I'm going to show you how I do it. Your fabric arrives this way. It's folded in all sorts of ways. What you want to do is line up the manufacturer's fold with a line on your cutting mat, just to keep everything straight. Then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to place it on the fabric. Again, line it up, and I'm going to start with a little fold here. Then I'm just going to take it and I'm going to fold it and fold it and fold it. I'm just going to keep going until I have the entire piece folded on my ruler. This works really well because when you put it in your fabric closet or on your shelf or even in a fabric bin, you are going to have all these neatly stacked pieces that will be the same size. They'll be a little taller than each other depending on your yardage, but they'll all be the same width. Now, I'm doing this sideways, so it's a little awkward, but you want to make sure that you keep your fabric lined up here at the bottom because it can get skewed easily. Now, when I get to the end, if there's just a little bit, I take this piece, I fold it back, and then I do this. I pull my ruler out, which it slips out easily. I pulled my ruler out. I'm going to fold this in the middle, and I'm going to place it on the shelf. They're all going to be the same size. They're going to be stacked. I like to stack mine according to color, and that way when I need a particular color, I can even see how much I have here based on the fold. Tip number 2, how to easily position a 1/4" seam guide on your sewing machine so that you get that 1/4" seam allowance every single time. This can be tricky when you're just starting out. I love using either masking tape or Marcy Baker's sewing edge vinyl strips, that's what I used here, to mark that guide. Actually, you can extend it beyond your sewing machine onto your sewing table, but I don't have that here. And I always cut the piece, I place a cut so that I can easily remove my bobbin covering. But it really works. Just position the tape as instructed, and it helps your seams stay accurate, especially for those long seams that you're showing. You'll find a complete tutorial in our free workshop, How to Create the Perfect Quilt Block Every Time, if you're interested in watching more. Tip number 3, using a pressing solution on your fabric before you cut it. This is so important. Any pressing solution will work. A homemade brand, Terriel Magic, I diluted 1/2 and 1/2 with water, Mary Ellen's Best Press, whatever works for you. But for stable, accurate cuts, using a pressing solution on your fabric before cutting can really make all the difference. First of all, it helps to minimize stretching. Secondly, especially on bias cuts, it keeps it more stable as you are cutting, and it gives you some crisp edges. So here's how I do this so you can try it out on your next project. If I have a fat 1/4 of fabric, and again, they're folded all sorts of ways, I like to use my pressing solution on my fat quarter before I ever cut into it. I press the entire piece, and then once it's done, I fold it back up again. I know that that fat quarter has been sprayed. Now, the way I do it, I like to use a mister bottle because it gives it a nice, even, light spray. And basically, I just do like that. That's all there is to it. Then I take my iron and I'm going to press it until it's dry. So I don't saturate it. I know some people do. I just give it that light spray, and it gives it enough body for me that when I am then cutting my pieces using my ruler, it stays in place and I have a nice, flat, accurate piece. Tip number 4, diagonal pinning to match intersections. Every quilt block has some sort of an intersection that we need to match, and matching those seams at the intersection can sometimes be challenging, but diagonal pinning makes it so much easier. By pinning diagonally, you can ensure that your points are going to align perfectly, or your intersections will be exactly where you want them to be when you sew them. They are not going to shift and surprise you when you open up your block and press it. So for a complete demonstration of this technique, check out our free workshop on how to create the perfect quilt block every time. As you can see from this particular example, this is diagonal pinning. I always mark my intersection first, and then I pin right in the middle, then I pin, and then if needed, pin and pin again. Tip number 5, mitered border corners. They are easy. Do not be intimidated by mitered corners. They really are easier than they look. The key is in the folding, and then in the pressing, the pinning, and then giving a little tug to square things up. This technique will help you get a neat, professional looking corner every single time, with everything matching where it needs to match. For more guidance, watch my video, Quilting Borders, How to Miter Corners the Easy Way. Follow me step by step with your project, and I guarantee you are going to be so pleased at the outcome when it comes to mitering corners. It's not that hard. Tip number 6, the importance of changing my sewing machine needle and my rotary cutting blade regularly. When I first started quilting, I had no idea how often I needed to change my sewing machine needle. Usually a size 80 or a size 90 works for quilting and piecing. I also didn't know how often I should change my rotary blade. Of course I knew if I broke my needle, time to change it. If my rotary blade wasn't cutting, time to change it. But when do I really need to change it? When is most optimal? A sharp needle and a sharp blade make cutting and sewing so much smoother. It's recommended, get this, that we change our sewing machine needle at least every 8 to 10 hours of sewing. Do I do that? Well, no, I don't. Am I supposed to do that? Well, yeah, really I should. One indicator that you need to change your needle, of course, if it's broken, we change it. But if you hear a popping sound, that could mean you have a burr on your needle, or there's something going on there that you need a new needle. Time to change it. Also, if you can see that your needle is having trouble going into the fabric, maybe it's poking the fabric down into the throat plate, it's getting dull and you need to change it. What's a good rule of thumb? Every time you start a new quilt project, change your needle. Is that often enough? It may be. If you find that you need to change it a little more often, if it's a pretty intricate pattern, or if you've been doing a lot of paper piecing, then you may need to change a little bit more often. But take a look. It's really worth it to do that. Now, when I change my rotary blade, I love using the Fabric Hut blades. They're titanium blades. I've got a great deal in the description if you're interested in purchasing them. It's about half off. And they really do work well. They're very strong and sturdy, and I love them. Tip number 7, measure your pre-cut fabrics for accuracy before you cut them or sew them together. Don't assume they're the size that it says. Pre-cut fabrics like jelly rolls, charm packs, this is a skinny strip it's called. This is called a 10 square. All of these pre-cuts are not always perfectly cut, and you want to make sure they are before you put them into your quilt. So if you measure every one before you sew it, make sure you measure to see, is this 10 inches? Is it 9.5? Whatever it is, you want to know for sure what it is before you begin your pattern. After using one of these skinny strip packs, we discovered that they were not exactly accurate, and all this needed to be trimmed off. It's really important to save yourself frustration and a lot of seam ripping to make that check ahead of time. I wish I would have known. Trust me, this extra step will save you a lot of headaches. Or you could just go ahead and cut your own strips and not use a pre-cut. The advantage of the pre-cuts is that oftentimes they have many different patterns and fabrics that we probably wouldn't buy normally. So we enjoy having that option of variety, but we want to make sure they're accurate before we begin our project. Tip number 8. The correct way to use a seam ripper. We all need to use a seam ripper from time to time, but there really is a right and a wrong way to use one. You need to hold the ripper with the small ball, this little red ball, underneath the seam and gently glide it through. Let me show you how. So we're going to remove this seam using our seam ripper and making sure we use that red ball that's on the seam ripper properly. Open up your piece and you're going to use your sewing machine foot as an anchor. So we're going to just put it underneath there. We have to remove some of the stitches down at the end to get us started. So I'm just going to remove a couple. The red ball goes underneath the stitching. The blade goes along the stitching. Hold on here. And then you're just going to go ahead and rip that out. And it just rips out so easily. Make sure if you come to an intersection, you slow down. You might even want to just pick that out by yourself, but look, there you go. That's all it takes. This method prevents you from accidentally tearing your fabric. Make sure you take it slow and easy, and as you rip, you want to keep an even glide on your seam ripper. It might take a little bit of practice, but once you get it down, it really works well. Check out my YouTube video titled Life-Changing: How to Use a Seam Ripper the Right Way. You can also find this technique in our free workshop called How to Create the Perfect Quilt Block Every Time. The links are in the description. Tip number 9, how to avoid a V-cut when you're cutting your fabric strip. Have you ever noticed a V-cut at the fold when cutting fabric strips? This happens if your fabric is not perfectly aligned along the top selvage edge. Everything needs to be lined up before you make that first cut. And as a newbie, I didn't know that. So this is what happens. You go ahead and you cut, you think everything is lined up properly, and then this is what you get. As you can see, there is a V here. It's longer here, it's shorter here. You cannot use this piece easily as a long strip because you've got that inaccuracy right there in the middle. If you go to our free workshop on how to create the perfect quilt block every time, I show you how to fold your fabric so that this never happens and you don't waste that valuable fabric by an improper cut. Tip number 10, pinning quilt borders before you sew them to the quilt to avoid wavy borders. That means a border that is really wavy, and that happens when you don't accurately pin before you put your borders on your quilt. That means you need to measure the quilt top, you need to measure your border, and then pin accordingly. So if we pretend that this is a full-size quilt, here we have the top side, the vertical sides, and we have our border. It's pieced in the middle. We are going to place this border strip. It has been measured accurately to the size of the quilt top. Once we've cut them to size, we're going to right sides together, place them. We are going to mark the midpoint with a pin. Then we are going to pin the two ends. You can find your midpoint of your quilt by folding the quilt top in half and folding your border in half. Pin the top, pin the bottom, pin in between the pins, and you'll continue pinning in between the pins until you have that entire quilt top pinned. Once that's done, you'll sew your 1/4 inch seam allowance and you are not going to have a wavy border. If you take your border strip and you just cut it larger than what your quilt top is, sew it on, and then trim it off at the bottom, that's where those wavy borders come from. You don't want that to happen. It's really difficult to quilt your quilt if the border is not flat. And this is my bonus tip. This is something I really wish I knew when I first started quilting. One of my absolute favorite tools is a pressing marker. You can make a do-it-yourself version that helps you achieve perfectly flat seams using a marker, empty, filled with your favorite pressing solution. All you have to do, now I have two sizes here. I'm going to show you with the larger size. All you do is take the pressing marker, it's been filled with solution, and you are going to place it right on the seam. You can either do it from this side or you can open it up and you can place the pressing marker solution on the inside. Totally up to you. It's still going to saturate your fabric. Then you are going to press your seam until it's dry. Once you have pressed this, you are going to see the flattest seams you have ever seen before. As you can see from my center, from this, you just don't get a seam that looks like this without using that concentrated solution right where it needs to go. You're not spraying it so that it goes all over the place. It goes right on the seam allowance, and it actually flattens out your seams so that as you continue piecing, you are going to have a perfect product. It's simple, it's very affordable, and it's incredibly effective. If you're curious about this tool, check out my YouTube video titled Get Perfectly Flat Seams with this unbelievable pressing method. I hope these tips help you as much as they have helped me over the years. I know there are more tips to share. I know you have more tips. Please comment with your quilting tip that you wish you knew when you first started quilting. If you found this video useful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel for more quilting tips and quilting tutorials. And don't forget to check out all the links in the description to dive deeper into these techniques. I am always trying to be joyful, but I will always be merry. Thank you so much for joining me.